Look at that. That's cool.
Frank Fritz.
After his death, they opened Frank Fritz's garage and found a car that shouldn't exist. When Frank Fritz passed away, most people expected the usual estate process to follow: a few auctions, some personal belongings handed to family, and maybe a nostalgic look back at his time on American pickers. But no one imagined that his quiet garage in rural Iowa would become the center of one of the strangest discoveries in automotive history. After the doors were unlocked and the dust settled, it wasn't just classic cars people found. It was something far more mysterious. A vehicle that didn't match any public records. A car that shouldn't exist at all. And it all started with a note that Frank had left behind: "Don't sell." Not for display. Frank Fritz was known for his love of forgotten treasures. For years on American pickers, he traveled the country looking for items others had left behind. While Mike Wolfe often took the lead, Frank was the quiet force. He had a deep knowledge of vintage signs, gas pumps, and most of all, classic cars. But unlike many collectors, Frank wasn't in it for fame or profit. His passion came from a desire to save pieces of history. His garage wasn't open to the public. There were no polished floors or velvet ropes. It was a place of restoration, filled with dust, oil, and memory. His vehicles weren't just cars. They were stories. Among the cars in his collection were some truly special pieces. There was a 1956 Chevrolet Bel Air, a 1967 Ford Fairlane GT390, and even a luxurious 1960 Cadillac Fleetwood that he found with his longtime friend and co-star Mike Wolfe. Frank had also purchased two rare 1954 Nash Healey sports cars for a total of $46,000. One of his most prized possessions was a 1947 Cisitalia Nuvolari Spider, an incredibly rare Italian sports car worth more than $500,000. Each car had a history. Frank could tell you where he got it, how much work went into fixing it, and why it deserved to be saved. He wasn't collecting for show. He was rescuing the past. As the years went by, Frank became more private. After he left American Pickers around 2020, following some health issues and back surgery, fans noticed his absence but assumed he was recovering. The reality was more complicated. Frank had begun to live more quietly. He stopped making public appearances and rarely posted updates online. Those closest to him said he spent more and more time in his garage, often alone. Sometimes neighbors would see a new car being rolled in late at night. If they asked, Frank would just say, "It's older than you think," and close the garage door. There were whispers and rumors in the collector community. Some said Frank was searching for mythical vehicles, cars that were rumored to exist but had never been confirmed. These included one-off prototypes, experimental cars from the Cold War era, and even vehicles tied to government projects. People speculated that he had a secret list, names of rare machines that had been lost to time. Others believed he had contacts inside old car companies, retired engineers who still held secrets from decades ago. None of these stories were ever confirmed, but they added to the mystery surrounding Frank's later years. Shortly before his death, Frank made some unusual comments to friends. In one conversation, he said, "There's something in that garage that'll outlive all of us." In another, he mentioned, "If they ever open that garage without me, tell them I left everything behind." At the time, people thought it was just Frank being poetic or sentimental. But those words would take on new meaning after his passing. When the estate team arrived to begin the legal process, Frank's garage remained sealed under court order. No one had entered it in years. Not even family or friends. It was a mystery locked behind steel doors. The day the garage was finally opened, there was a strange silence. Not just the kind of quiet you expect at a memorial, but a deeper stillness. Estate attorneys, law enforcement, and a few close acquaintances stood at the edge of the driveway, waiting. The roll-up door creaked open, inch by inch. Dust poured out like smoke. Inside, they found 8 cars parked tightly together. Some were covered in tarps. Others sat bare, their paint dulled but still impressive. Each one held value. But in the far back, under piles of old tools and faded boxes, was something different. It didn't look like the other cars. It was lower, wider, and had no visible logos or markings. The design was strange, almost futuristic but clearly aged. The VIN plate had been scratched off. The body looked like a mix of 60s muscle and Cold War era tech. There was no chrome, no license plate, and no identifying badge. When they finally opened the driver's side door, they found a yellowed index card on the seat. It read, Valkyrie Project, 1965, do not test. No one knew what to make of it. Experts were called in. Some said it resembled a long-lost prototype developed by a defense contractor in the 1960s, a vehicle designed for both land surveillance and high-speed performance. According to historical rumors, this Valkyrie project was a joint effort between an American automaker and a military technology firm. Only one unit had ever been built, and it was believed to have been destroyed during testing. That vehicle, if real, had vanished from all official records. Could this be it? And if so, how did Frank Fritz end up with it? No one has been able to trace the car's origin. There are no sales records, no title documents, and no registration history. Some believe Frank found it during a private sale or estate auction, possibly through one of his secret contacts. Others think it was part of a classified collection sold off quietly in the late 80s or 90s. Frank never spoke about it publicly. There are no photos. No blog posts. No social media mentions. It was as if he wanted to keep it hidden, not just from the world, but even from the people closest to him. That simple note he left, don't sell. Not for display, might have been more than a suggestion. It might have been a warning. Since the discovery, experts have continued to examine the vehicle. Some have confirmed the presence of materials and technologies that were not commonly used in civilian vehicles in the 1960s. There are rumors of reinforced doors, electronic shielding, and even early forms of stealth coatings. Others claim that parts of the car resemble experimental designs from old NASA or military blueprints. But with no official documentation, the mystery remains. The vehicle now sits in a secure storage facility under investigation. Some believe it could be worth millions. Others say its real value lies in what it represents, a hidden chapter of history. For fans of Frank Fritz, this discovery changes everything. He wasn't just a picker or a collector. He was a historian, a guardian of forgotten stories. His garage wasn't just a place to keep cars. It was a sanctuary of secrets. Frank may never have meant for the world to see what was hidden in the back of that room. But now that it's been found, the legend of Frank Fritz has only grown. His final years weren't spent in decline. They were spent in quiet pursuit of the unbelievable. And in the end, he didn't just chase history. He caught it. And locked it behind a steel door. When Frank Fritz passed away, many people remembered him for his love of old things. From rusty signs to vintage motorcycles, Frank had built a life around finding forgotten treasures. He was well known from TV, and fans admired his sharp eye and big heart. But few knew the full story of what he kept locked away in his private garage. After his death, when the garage door was opened, no one expected anything unusual. People thought they'd see the same kind of classic cars he had always collected, beautiful, rare, and well-known. But hidden deep in the back, under a grey torp, they found something no one could explain. A car sat sideways, not parked neatly like the others. Its shape was strange, low to the ground with wide fenders and a design that looked fast even while standing still. One officer pulled the top back slowly, not knowing that what they were about to uncover would become one of the biggest mysteries in the car world. Underneath the top was a car that looked like a Corvette, but something about it was off. The body was rough, handmade even, with curves and lines more aggressive than any known Corvette model. Most people guessed it looked like a 1963 Grand Sport Corvette, a rare racing version that Chevrolet once built. But only 5 Grand Sports were ever made, and all of them were accounted for. This one didn't match any of the records. The paint was faded, the body worn, but the details were still sharp. Even stranger, there was no VIN number where it should have been. Instead, a small brass plate was bolted onto the firewall with strange numbers and the words "experimental use only." Mechanics and car experts were called in. One of them, a Corvette historian, examined it carefully and said, "This shouldn't exist." That's when everyone realized they weren't just looking at an old car, they were looking at a puzzle, one that Frank had hidden away on purpose. Why had he kept it a secret? And what did it really mean? As they searched through the garage, trying to make sense of what they'd found, someone noticed a small note taped above Frank's old workbench. It was barely visible under layers of dust and oil. The paper had yellowed with age, and the ink had smeared in spots, but the message was still clear: "I left behind everything there. Frank." It didn't say what everything meant, but standing there, with the mystery Corvette just a few feet away, the words felt powerful. It was like Frank had left behind a final clue, a message for whoever found the car. He could have told someone about it before he died. He could have written about it, or shown it on television. But he didn't. Instead, he left a car covered by a tarp and a handwritten note, like a riddle meant to be solved after he was gone. That's what made it so fascinating. The more people looked, the more questions they had. How had Frank gotten this car? Where had it come from? And why had he never mentioned it, not once, in all his years of collecting? News of the discovery spread fast, especially among car lovers and collectors. Vintage Corvette forums lit up with pictures and rumors. Everyone had a theory. Some believed it was a prototype, a car built secretly by GM, General Motors, and never released. Others thought it might be one of the Lost Mules, test cars that were created during the Grand Sport project but never made public. A few believed it was a one-of-a-kind car built by a GM engineer using stolen molds and factory parts. But no one knew for sure. GM refused to give any information, saying they had no records of such a vehicle. Former GM employees, however, hinted that more Grand Sports may have been built than officially stated. If Frank's car was one of them, then its discovery wasn't just rare, it was historic. It could change part of American automotive history. But still, no one could explain how Frank had gotten it or why he'd kept it hidden from the world. Even more mysterious was the complete silence surrounding the car during Frank's life. He had been on television for years, traveling the country and sharing his passion for collecting. He'd shown off dozens of rare vehicles and talked openly about his favorites. But never once did he mention this strange Corvette. There were no photos, no interviews, no slips of the tongue. It was as if the car didn't exist until the day they uncovered it. That silence said a lot. It wasn't an accident. Frank had chosen to keep this car a secret. Why? Maybe it was something he wasn't supposed to have. Maybe he had made a promise to someone. Or maybe it was just too special. Whatever the reason, his silence added to the mystery. This wasn't just a forgotten car, it was something more. Something that mattered deeply to Frank, enough that he never breathed a word about it. As the investigation continued, stories began to surface. One rumor claimed that Frank had bought the car from a retired GM engineer in the early 2000s. Another story said he'd found it at an estate sale in Michigan, not far from old GM testing grounds. None of these stories could be confirmed. But in a strange way, they all fit Frank's personality. He was the kind of collector who loved the hidden, the unusual, the things that didn't make sense. He didn't chase fame. He didn't show off. His garage wasn't a polished museum, it was a working space, full of history and dust and heart. That's what made it the perfect place for a secret like this to stay hidden. And maybe, just maybe, Frank liked it that way. He didn't need the world to know what he had. He just needed to know that it was safe, waiting in the corner until someone came looking. Collectors and museums soon started making offers. Some offered huge amounts of money, even without documentation. One international collector reportedly offered a blank check. But the estate didn't sell. The car stayed right where it was, under the same roof Frank had left it in. Experts kept coming, each hoping to uncover the truth. But no one could say for sure what the car was. Some believed it was a real Grand Sport prototype. Others thought it might be a perfect replica, built by someone with deep knowledge and rare tools. Either way, the craftsmanship was too good to be fake. Every detail, every weld, every curve told a story. It wasn't just built, it was created by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. And Frank had known what it was. That much was clear. He had kept it safe, out of sight, untouched and unclaimed, until the very end. The note, "I left behind everything there," started to feel heavier the more people read it. Was Frank trying to say that this car was the most important thing he ever found? Was it a goodbye? A riddle? Or maybe it was his final message, that not everything valuable has to be seen. That sometimes, the best treasures are the ones we keep for ourselves. The car wasn't just a machine, it was a mystery, a message, and maybe even a challenge. To look deeper. To ask questions. To wonder. It reminded people that collecting isn't always about showing off. Sometimes it's about preserving something quiet, something personal, something full of meaning. Frank didn't talk about this car because maybe he didn't need to. Maybe it meant something only he could understand. And maybe, in the end, that's the real story. Today, the car still sits in legal limbo. Experts argue. Historians dig through old records. GM says nothing. The car remains untouched, protected, and wrapped in questions. But for many, that's what makes it beautiful. Whether it turns out to be a real grand sport, a lost prototype, or the greatest replica ever built, the car now stands as a symbol of Frank Fritz's legacy. Not just because of what it is, but because of what it represents. A love for mystery. A respect for history. And a quiet kind of magic that only someone like Frank could create. He may be gone, but his final find still speaks. It whispers stories through steel and silence. It challenges us to look closer. To believe that some things are meant to be hidden until the time is right. And when that time comes, they don't just change what we know, they change how we see the world. So what do you think Frank was trying to tell us with this mysterious car? Was it a secret, a goodbye, or something more? Let us know in the comments below. Because sometimes, the best stories are the ones that leave us asking questions.